Thank everybody for showing up for today's webinar for the Mid-Atlantic Territory. Today's webinar is, as you can see, ALS clinical research at Georgetown University. And our presenter is Eli Wolfgang. And Eli's a clinical research coordinator at the Georgetown University Medical Center in DC. He received his bachelor's in neuroscience at Middlebury College and worked in healthcare consulting before transitioning to clinical research. Eli manages and coordinates 5 to 7 out of approximately 60 ongoing clinical trials in the Department of Neurology at Georgetown. He primarily focuses on neuromuscular conditions. So before I hand it over to Eli, I'm going to ask everybody, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to drop them in the little Q&A box. Mine's at the bottom of my screen. Sometimes it may be at the top of your screen. And what we'll do is when we're done, we'll go through all those questions and give Eli the opportunity to answer them. So with that being said, Eli, I am going to turn it over to you. I'm going to mute myself and my dog and just hand it to you. Thank you so much.
Of course. And yeah, thank you so much to Jerry and the ALS Association regional team here. Really grateful that I get the chance to speak with everyone and kind of tell everyone about what we have here at Georgetown in terms of ALS clinical research. I was mentioning earlier, so I want to make sure this is pretty informal and everyone gets a chance to ask any questions that they may have. No question is really off limits here, and I'll try my best to answer. But in terms of how I envision the webinar going, I'll just plan to kind of walk through. I have just a handful of slides here, not very many. And so I'll just kind of walk through essentially an overview of each trial and what it's looking at, a little bit about maybe the eligibility criteria, and if it's a clinical drug trial, an investigational drug trial, I'll talk a little bit about what that drug is. And then once I kind of, spend the next 15 to 20 or so minutes walking through these slides, happy to really open it up to just questions that people have, or I can spend more time discussing trials in depth if people want to know more about them. But again, it's really more to be as informative as possible and to, kind of let everyone know about what we have available here. So with that being said, I'll jump right in. So these are the team members at our site. So this includes all of the neurology clinical research coordinators, not just the ones focusing on neuromuscular trials. But so myself and Gabby are the primary study coordinators for most of the ALS studies. The associate director at our site is David Pisfield, and Sophia Farah is the director of clinical trials here in the Department of Neurology. The best contact is about these trials if you should have further questions after the webinar, or if you just want to get in touch about potentially scheduling a screening visit at our site. The best person to contact is Gabby Law, and I've included her email and phone number here. But I'll also make sure to follow up in the chat or maybe after the call with this information if people don't catch it here at the initial stage. And maybe before I go any further, Jerry, I just want to make sure that my audio and video, the shared screen, are coming through well for everyone.
It is for me. It is for me.
Okay, wonderful. I should have checked first, but I just wanted to double check on that. Good to hear. So great. So with that, I'll jump right into the trials that we have. And I'll just kind of walk through, as I said, study by study. So what I put together was a couple of slides that walk through each of the studies. And I included these 3 on this page because these are our 3 investigational drug trials that we have available. They do have some differences in terms of course, the drug that they're offering, as well as study design. And I'll kind of walk through what those differences are and explain from there. So I'll start at the top with the Himalaya trial. So this is a trial that is sponsored by the drug company Sanofi. And it's a phase 2 multi-center across the US and internationally as well, double-blind placebo-controlled study. And maybe just to address that portion first, a double-blind placebo-controlled study, I'm sure many of you already know, but just as a kind of refresher, this means that double-blind, we as the providers of the study don't know what medication is being received, and the participant doesn't know either because it's placebo-controlled. So what that means is you're getting either the active drug compound that's being studied or a placebo, which is, it doesn't have any active drug compound in it. And so again, during that double-blind placebo-controlled period, both the study coordinators and the investigators of the study don't know what drug's being received, and neither does the participant. And this is in order to, run these trials at the gold standard of how clinical trials are run to ensure data is accurate, and we can really understand if these drugs are effective. So again, this is to go back then to the Himalaya trial. I can talk a little bit, I think, about the key inclusion-exclusion criteria, and then a little bit about what's entailed with the study, and then talk finally about the drug compound itself that's being studied. So key inclusion-exclusion for this study are adults with ALS. It can either be sporadic or familial. And this is a big one, the first symptom onset prior to the screening visit has to have been within 2 years. So this can be, again, and this will be a kind of a key theme that comes up when it comes to clinical trials, but it's this early identification part that is really important and is where a lot of folks will sometimes screen fail, which means they're not able to get into the study because they don't meet the screening criteria. And it's really due to that time, the efficiency of getting patients seen for that screening visit within that time period since the onset of weakness. And I know it can really differ for folks. Sometimes they may have had onset of weakness, years ago, and maybe it wasn't attributed to ALS. But it's certainly helpful, if you're interested in trials to kind of get the ball rolling earlier or sooner rather than later, to make sure you're still eligible. The second piece here is SVC, and to explain, that's the slow vital capacity. So I'm sure folks have a good understanding of this, but when they do the pulmonary function test, the respiratory test, testing your breathing function, that just has to be a certain level, a certain percent of what's predicted for you to qualify. So breathing function has to be above a certain level to qualify. So those are the important inclusion-exclusion criteria for this study. In terms of a quick protocol overview for what's included, so as I mentioned, it's double-blind, placebo-controlled. So the placebo-controlled period lasts for 24 weeks, which is 6 months. After that is the option to enroll in the open label extension, which is where, again, this is formerly in the placebo-controlled phase, then you go into the open label extension where you're getting the active drug compound that's being studied. So this is an opportunity for folks, who've completed the placebo-controlled period to then get access to the active drug compound that's being studied. And the follow-up there differs across the studies here, but it's usually between 1 to 2 years in length of that open label extension where you have access to it. The other piece here is there are about 6 to 8 clinic visits during that 6-month time period. So that, that corresponds to about once a month you have to come back in clinic, and you'll do a number of different things here, but primarily it's blood draw, urine collection, and a bunch of different test batteries that we do, including the breathing function test, and muscle testing, muscle strength testing, and a bunch of different questionnaires that you'll become very used to. So that's kind of the overview for the Himalaya trial. The drug compound itself is it's an oral medication, and the idea here is it targets the RIPK1 pathway. It's an inhibitor of RIPK1, which I guess in preclinical models was shown to be a key mediator of necroptosis and inflammatory pathways in ALS. So necroptosis, cell death, and the inflammatory pathways in ALS. So trying to reduce the inflammation and hopefully preserve neurons for people with ALS. And I didn't write it in here, but this is a twice-a-day medication. So you take it once in the morning, once at night. So that's kind of the overview for the Sanofi Himalaya trial. The other one to touch on here is the Healy ALS platform trial. So this one's a little bit different, and it has multiple regimens, and each of the regimens corresponds to a different drug product. And so the goal with the Healy platform trial, or the reason why it has multiple regimens of different drugs, which I know for me at least was very confusing when I started, is that it increases the efficiency of studying multiple medications, multiple potential active drugs at once, because you don't have to do all this study startup and study closeout procedures every single time. And so it's a kind of evergreen study where they just bring in new regimens, new drugs to test, and it just increases a lot of efficiency because of that. So I'll actually start with the investigational drug overview here on the right side of the page, just so you have an idea of what the compound is that's in regimen F, which is the current active regimen in the Healy trial. And then I'll go through and touch on kind of the key differences from the Sanofi Himalaya trial, because I think it's helpful to compare and contrast. So to start, the medication that's being tested is also an oral medication, and it's taken once daily instead of twice daily. And what it's targeting here is the integrated stress response, which is a cellular response in chronic, highly conserved cellular mechanism that has been hypothesized to be chronically active in ALS, and not just ALS, but a number of neurodegenerative conditions. So activation of this integrated stress response has been found in the spinal cord samples, postmortem spinal cord samples of ALS patients. And so the hypothesis of how it's potentially benefiting ALS patients is by inhibiting part of that integrated stress response, a protein that's key in that stress response. And so the goal is to hopefully this will help to dissolve the TDP-43 stress granules in nervous system tissue. And I know this is a lot of kind of lingo here and jargon, but I'm sure many of you have heard of TDP-43, which is one of the important proteins that aggregates in people with ALS. And so the goal really here is to restore normal protein synthesis in these cells. And it's hypothesized that by targeting this stress response that your cells are experiencing, that we're able to hopefully mitigate that. Moving on to a bit about how this differs from the Himalaya trial. In terms of the visits and how often you'd have to come in, largely very similar, right? So you're going to come in about once a month to the clinic where, again, we'll do similar testing. We'll do the breathing testing. We'll do a number of questionnaires. We'll do blood and urine collection. All of that stuff is very similar in this trial. It has very similar endpoints. The other thing important to note here is it does have that option to enroll in the kind of open label extension or active treatment extension, where instead of not knowing if you're getting a placebo or the active drug, you know for sure you're getting the active drug compound. One of the big differences between the Healy trial and the Himalaya trial is the Healy trial does include a lumbar puncture at both the baseline visit, the first visit, the beginning of your 6 months of the double-blind period, and then also at the end of those 6 months. And so a lumbar puncture, also known as a spinal tap, it's a way to access the CSF, the cerebrospinal fluid. And it's important for this trial to better understand how the drug's working. And so it's part of the protocol. So that is one thing that's just important to note in difference in study procedures between the Sanofi Himalaya trial and the Healy platform trial for regimen F. Moving on to the kind of key differences here. This is the middle column, the key inclusion exclusion criteria. So it's a little more lenient in terms of what type of folks can get in. So the onset of symptoms is less, it has to be within 3 years or 36 months instead of the 2 years for the Himalaya trial. And additionally, that vital capacity, that breathing test, the threshold is a little lower here. It's 50% versus 60%. So again, this allows patients who may have progressed a little further to enter this trial, or if they've had onset of weakness from an earlier time versus someone who would otherwise not be eligible for the Himalaya trial. I think that should cover the Healy platform trial and specifically regimen F. The final trial I have listed here is the Biogen ALSPIRE study. So off the bat, the main difference here for this one, and I'll jump to, again, the drug overview on the far right. This is a ASO, or antisense oligonucleotide, and the big difference here is it's administered intrathecally or via lumbar puncture or spinal tap. And so what that means is you'll have spinal taps or lumbar punctures about once a month for the 5 to 8 dosing visits in the 24-week placebo-controlled period. And then there's the potential to enroll in the open label extension. I believe the lumbar punctures are still about once a month, but I think they're extended out a little further apart in the open label extension. But so this is it's a little different in terms of study design. We no longer have this oral medication. It's a intrathecal medication, or one that goes right into your cerebrospinal fluid, and so it's injected there during that procedure. Great. And so, I do see I have some questions. So I actually might run right through, finish with talking about ALSPIRE, and then I'll answer these questions because I want to make sure I get to them. So maybe to talk briefly about the drug that's being tested. So this drug, as I mentioned, it's targeting the ataxin-2 gene, the ataxin-2 protein. It's targeting the mRNA, which is part of the code and how cells are able to reproduce certain proteins. And it targets this mRNA to decrease the levels of the protein, the ataxin-2 protein. And again, the goal here is to mitigate and lower the TDP-43 aggregate protein toxicity. And so I know we had talked about that briefly before when we were talking about the Healy platform trial. So that's one way to get at that TDP-43 aggregates, is to go for the integrated stress response. That's one way that drug company is going after it. For the Biogen ALSPIRE study, they're targeting it through the ataxin-2 protein, which is just a different pathway that they're targeting it via. And so a little bit about just the clinic visit. So as you can tell, it's a little more intensive in terms of your time. So with the 13 to 19 clinic visits versus the about once a month clinic visits for the other two. And the dosing visits, of course, are lumbar punctures. However, this own option also has the option to enroll in that open label extension period where you're getting the drug. And again, all the other study procedures are largely similar to what we saw for the first two trials, where we're talking about the questionnaires and the breathing tests and muscle testing. In terms of the key inclusion-exclusion criteria, again, very similar. I think the main difference here is that in terms of, there are a couple excluded genetic variants. So both SOD1 and FUS genes, if you have that, presence of that or history of that, you're ineligible for the study. And then the SBC criteria, again, is very similar. In the cohort that is relevant to folks without the ataxin-2 gene extension, it's 60% of the predicted value. So let me go to the questions now and get a drink of water just to see what's been asked so far.
Eli, you can see the questions, all right? Can you see them?
I can, yeah, I'm opening them up
Okay.
here.
Okay.
Opening up here now.
Just let me know if you have any
And
trouble seeing them, or just let me know.
will do, thank you. Okay, thank you. So first question is, will this deck be shared afterwards? I'm happy to share the information in the deck afterwards. I'm sure Jerry hopefully will be able to coordinate that. But yes, more than happy to share these slides after the presentation. The second question, if the trial restricts SVC 60% and 24 months since onset, won't that restrict for whom FDA and drug companies approve treatment? So this is something that I don't quite have line of sight into directly. I don't know how the FDA will then evaluate the drugs once they, if they show strong signal or hit their primary endpoints. I'm not sure how they'll evaluate then drug companies, or how drug companies will evaluate, who's authorized to receive the medication. I know that's an ongoing battle for the currently approved medications. But you're right, it will depend on what's been done in the trial, and then drug companies absolutely will have a say in what they approve or don't approve in terms of who can receive the medication. But you're right with that question there. And then let's see, second question, protein present in postmortem tissue exams. Yes, Christina, that's a great question. We are accepting postmortem tissue donation through our Target ALS trial or research study. So I will actually, my next slide has some information about that. But that is an option. It's run through Dr. Brent Harris, who's the principal investigator at our site. And I can pass along, I can also pass along information to contact the folks who run that study. It's actually run through a different people at our site. So it's not run through me, but I would be able to connect you with the people who would be able to get you the help you need there. And then we have another question around issue of miss and underdiagnosis. Okay, isn't it difficult to determine number of months / years since onset? Absolutely, and that's certainly an ongoing challenge, I think, with determining who's eligible. And it comes down to a conversation between the multiple physicians who are included as part of this, as well as conversation with the patient around really clarifying dates and times. But you're right, that is a challenge we face as part of this research. A big challenge is really nailing down the number of months or number of years since onset. Okay. I think I made my way through all the questions for now. But before I kind of leave this screen and go on to my next screen, I just wanted to make sure there weren't any more questions on these. We can also talk more at the end if people have more specific questions. I'm more than happy to cover off on them later. Okay, great. So I'll move on and talk a lot more about the other trials we have here. So again, so this first page is the ones that are experimental drug trials. So again, these are drugs that haven't been approved yet by the FDA, but they are being tested because they've shown promise in clinical trials and clinical studies. And so further research, of course, is needed in these phase 2 studies to see if they might be, show promise for, or be approved by the FDA for the treatment of ALS. So this second page here is the other studies that we have, and these are not investigational drug trials. So there's no drug being tested for these. The goal of these studies is more so observational or registry. So the first one I'll talk about is the Target ALS study. And I'll talk first about the the biorepository one, and then there's also the postmortem tissue collection one. So target ALS, the goal of the study is to generate this biorepository of specimens, so both blood, CSF, and urine. And this is linked to clinical information. And the goal here really is to better understand the disease, and so that we may better develop trials moving forward, so we have a better understanding of what to target when we develop medications, all of the above. So you can see the inclusion and exclusion criteria are very similar to the other ones. There's no cutoff here, as you'll notice, for onset. So, you can have onset, extensive, have been far in the past, and you'd still be eligible for the target ALS trial. And again, this is observational, so there's no drug that's being involved. It's really just to better understand the disease. It's important to note that for this study, it can be done concurrently with an investigational drug trial. So for example, I know folks who are either doing the Healy trial or the Biogen Alspire study, which includes lumbar punctures as part of its trial. They're able to trial as well because we're able to use the fluid that we generate from that study also for the target study. And so it's just a way to further research. It's really important to further research in this way. And so the target study is the way to do that. And it's great, especially when we can get overlap with our other studies. So you don't have to, come in for additional clinic visits or come in for different visits for this one versus the other one. You can just come in at the same time, and we can get all the results we need at the same time from you. The other study to mention here is the REFINE ALS study. This is related to the drug Radicava. It's an observational study related to the drug Radicava. Observational just means, again, we're not giving you an additional drug. We're just trying to better understand, in this case, how Radicava works in the body. So we're trying to understand both the pharmacodynamic effect of it, but as well as trying to quantify and understand the biomarkers that are available in the blood and urine by using this Radicava medication. So we're looking, okay, is there different efficacy in the real world when we're using this drug, it's already been approved. So understanding how it's used in the real world versus how it was used in a clinical trial setting. So there aren't really a lot of kind of barriers to entry here. It's really for just folks with ALS who are receiving edaravone or Radicava. The one caveat here is you can't do REFINE and also one of the drug trials. So you'd have to choose one or the other. I know for some folks who aren't eligible for one of the drug trials, they choose to participate in REFINE because it's a good option to participate in research and further research. But even if they're, especially if they're not eligible for the trials where you might receive a drug compound. What's included in the study is 8 total study visits over the course of a 6-month time period. And it corresponds to the first 6 cycles of the edaravone treatment. The nice thing is it can be done completely remotely. So everything from informed consent to all of the study visits are done remotely. The blood and urine collection can be done at your home via a home nurse. So all of it can be done from the comfort of your home, which is, I think, a big plus for folks. You don't have to travel to the site, travel to the clinic, especially if you're farther away. And again, I think the one thing I wanted to mention on REFINE that's important is, again, there's no direct benefit to the patients from participating in the study, but it is a good way to, for science to push forward and to better understand how this medication is working, so that hopefully we can continue to both better understand how we're using our current medications, but also push forward future treatments. The final one I wanted to talk about is MOVER. So this is run by the Muscular Dystrophy Association. And it is not just for folks with ALS, but it's for folks with a number of different neuromuscular diseases. And this is a registry study. So there's actually there's no participant involvement, no subject involvement at all. It's just the consent for your medical records, your medical data to be de-identified, which means stripped of all of your identifying information, and then added to this data hub. And once it's in the data hub, it's tracked over time. So hopefully, when you come back for your next clinic visit, the research assistant or research staff, us, are able to add this to the data hub. And the goal is to track patients over time, get a longitudinal understanding of patient care, and hopefully optimize both health outcomes and accelerate therapy development. So you can imagine that treatment, this is a national study and it's done across the US. You can imagine treatments and approaches to treatment might differ in one part of the country versus another. And the goal is to understand what's working the best. And so it's another way, again, no direct benefit to patients for participating, but it is for future patients. Hopefully that, it's contributing to science and hopefully pushing forward both therapeutic development and health outcomes for patients with ALS and a number of other neuromuscular diseases. So I'll pause there. I see we have a few more questions. That pretty much brings me to the end of my spiel. So I'll open the floor now to questions, and I'll open this up. So first question. Why is inclusion for trial based on symptom onset instead of ALS? I think ALS, probably ALS FRS score. It's a good question. So that is one part. Sometimes there's inclusion-exclusion criteria based on ALS FRS slope. That's that questionnaire that you're probably very familiar with. But it has to be a certain kind of over time. It has to not decrease by more than a certain amount for you to be eligible. I think symptom onset is one way that they determine inclusion-exclusion criteria because it can really affect the results of the trial. I know that sometimes when they include like larger ranges in terms of onset, they'll then end up doing like a subgroup analysis later where they just look at like folks who had within like a year of diagnosis or 2 years of diagnosis, and it'll show benefit with those patients. But then when you look at the broader population, including like people who had onset from a longer time, it won't show as much benefit. And so I think that's one reason why they do care about symptom onset. Let's see. Second question, any studies that focus on the synergistic benefits of taking multiple drugs? So we don't have a study specifically that looks at like observationally, what's the benefit of taking X plus Y? But these studies do allow for taking Radicava and Relyvrio, except for the Biogen one, excuse me. And so they are essentially studying that because they're studying the inclusion criteria allows for Radicava and Relyvrio, and they do analyses based on that. So once they release the data from these studies, once they've been finished, they will include there will be some comparison between what about folks who were naive or weren't taking Radicava or Relyvrio versus folks who were taking Radicava and Relyvrio. Okay, let's see, next question. So the next question is around the human genome. Do we know what research being? So I know, Paul, there are certain gene therapy trials that exist. We do not have any at our site. I guess you could consider the Biogen Alspire study to technically be a gene therapy trial, since it is antisense oligonucleotide. So it is impacting the genetic code in a sense via the mRNA. We don't have, so for example, one of the new drugs that's been approved for SOD1 ALS, the tofersen medication, that one is, again, targeting the gene. So I think there are research efforts being made there. We just don't have a lot of the trials here. Okay, and it looks like I have some specific questions about where they can reach me or reach our site. I'll be sure to flash up the contact information for Gabby, who will be the best contact for our studies. And I'll be sure to leave that up at the end of the presentation, just so folks are able to have that. So, and we do have a website. I can maybe add that in the chat. I'll add that in the chat for our website. It may not be the most updated, but there should be a website where I can link that in the chat.
So Eli, what we can do is we are taping this, so it will be available for folks to watch at other times. And I can share the deck. I can share any information with the care service coordinators throughout the territory, and they can spread it out also.
That sounds perfect. Thank you so much. I'll be sure to circulate that with you, and then hopefully we can get this all out to folks. And it looks like there are a couple of questions about kind of specific to certain patients. I'm happy to jump on the phone with anybody or email back and forth about, what you might be eligible for and all of that. But I think that's probably best for a more private conversation. So happy to do that though with anybody. Again, we'll circulate the information after this, just to make sure that people have a chance to maybe ask their more specific questions. So it looks like there is, oh, sorry about that. Were you gonna say something?
No, I was gonna ask a question if it's okay. If someone else is going to another clinic, they would still, I'm assuming they would still be able to get into the trials at Georgetown. Would they still be able to continue at their regular clinic and then just also go to Georgetown for the needed trial parts?
So that's exactly right. So they would be able to continue their normal clinical care at the sites they were located at, and we would just run the trial at our site. That's specifically helpful for folks who may not have access to a certain trial where they're currently seeing a neurologist or their neuromuscular specialist. So that's certainly an opportunity. Yeah, we can definitely make that happen. We usually just have to, there has to be a transfer of information. We have to get some of the medical records from your current neurologist, but you wouldn't have to change any of your normal clinical care. It would just be the research study that would be done at Georgetown.
Thank you.
Great, and it looks like there's a question about the postmortem program and looking for a little more discussion there. So I actually have another slide that I can pull up here. So let me just do that. So this is a little bit about the postmortem core tissue program. This is, again, I will say, since it's not my department, I don't have as much information about this, but the information I do have is here. So the goal is to really collect data and the tissue, to process, bank, and analyze this from ALS patients, postmortem ALS patients, and also control individuals. So, of course, these tissues for research, they're most beneficial very soon after passing, and having those logistics worked out prior to, if you're interested, can be very helpful. So I have information here about who to contact should you be interested in the postmortem tissue program, and really helping push research forward in that way. So the site PI, as I mentioned earlier, is Dr. Brent Harris, and the manager is Marina, and it looks like the coordinator is Carolyn. So Carolyn's information is here on the screen, both her email and phone number. So if this is something that you might be interested in, feel free to reach out to Carolyn here. I am happy if there's a more specific question about the postmortem tissue program. I'm happy to answer it, or try to answer it, or put you in touch with the coordinator. Great. Let's see. I don't think I had any. Yeah. So basically, just wanted to see if there were any other questions. I hope this was helpful for folks, and I was able to, provide some information that maybe you hadn't heard before, or knowledge of trials at the Georgetown site that you didn't know about.
All right, Eli, that's great. I'm going to wait and see if we have any last minute questions and everything. And I will tell you it is helpful, because I know, or at least I believe, the care service coordinators for the association are asked a lot about research and research trials. And I can speak for myself on this one. I sometimes find it very confusing. So, here we go. We got another question going on.
Looks like it's, yep, just thanking us. So thank you. I appreciate the kind words. Yeah, I will. You know what I'll do is I'll pull up the information again. So this is if people want to just take it down, or I know Jerry said you'd be circulating it after. So this is the contact information to use. And I'll be, Gabby and I work very closely together, but she's the one who will be primarily talking to people and taking this information in. So I just wanted to flash this information up on the screen so people have a chance to take it down. But again, it should be coming later as well. So don't feel the need to rush to a pad or your phone. And otherwise, I just want to say, yeah, it's been a real pleasure to get to speak to all of you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to do so. Yeah, it's been really wonderful. Thank you, Jerry, for giving me this opportunity.
Well, it is truly appreciated and great. And we will make sure that this information is sent out to everybody. And like I said earlier, we've also recorded the presentations. So what I will do is I will send it out to all the care service coordinators in our territory. And then they'll be able to share it with everybody. Okay. And once again, this is being recorded, and as soon as we get the link, I'll let you all know. So Eli, thank you so very much for taking time during your day and speaking with us. And I think we're good, guys. If there aren't any more questions or anything, then we will wish everybody a good day and hopefully see you next month at our webinar. All right, you guys, thank you so much. Eli, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
All right.
Have a good one, everyone.